Good afternoon, dear viewers. This is the Ruslan Belov channel, and in today's episode we will analyze the development of events on the Ukrainian theater of military operations as of the 11th of December 2025. The day was marked by numerous significant incidents, so let us proceed directly to the analysis. Our discussion will open with an overview of the situation on the line of contact. Over the past 24 hours, a whole series of cartographic changes have been recorded. First, let us examine the eastern Zaporizhzhia sector, where Russian military units continue to attack Huliaipole. Over the course of today, exceptionally important video materials have emerged. Records published by the Ukrainian side demonstrate the work of Ukrainian FPV drone operators who are attacking Russian positions both directly in Huliaipole and on the approaches to the settlement. One of the recorded attacks occurred at the intersection of Velika and Patriotikna streets. A Ukrainian drone operator struck precisely the object located at this point. Analysis of these frames allowed for corrections to be made to the cartographic data. If on the 10th of December 2025 the map had a certain appearance, then today there are already solid grounds to assert the advancement of Russian formations in the central quarters of Huliaipole. At the same time, the advancement itself is not the main news from Huliaipole. The key point lies in the fact that the presented video testifies to the successful forcing of the Huliaipole River by Russian units. This waterway flows somewhat north of those positions that Ukrainian drone operators were striking. Thus, a transition of Russian forces to the second stage of the battle for Huliaipole is being observed. Allow me to remind you that the operation is essentially divided into three phases. The first stage, which apparently has already been completed, included battles for the eastern and northeastern districts of Huliaipole. The second stage involves crossing the Huliaipole River and consolidating at the achieved lines. The final third phase consists of the complete clearing of the settlement. It is evident that the Russian army is already conducting combat operations along the Huliaipole riverbed, which indicates a consolidation process. The tempo of operational development on this section of the front line will depend on the success of this process. Moving on to the Pokrovsk-Mahorad direction. A significant volume of information is also coming from here. Let us begin with the Dnipropetrovsk sector. Today, Ukrainian resources distributed a video recording on which an FPV drone attack on Russian positions was recorded. Presumably, Russian diversionary groups used this structure as temporary shelter. Based on these materials, a number of cartographic platforms made corrections. If on the 10th of December the map displayed this entire territory as a disputed zone, then today there remains no doubt that Russian subdivisions have begun penetration into the territory of Novopodhorodne and are developing offensive actions along railway tracks, as well as along Highway T0406 in the direction of Mezheva. From the Pokrovsk sector, numerous cartographic updates are arriving. However, let us begin directly with the city of Pokrovsk itself. It should be recalled that according to statements by Siversk and Zelensky, Pokrovsk is partially or completely held by the armed forces of Ukraine. The situation is characterized as tense but stable, and Ukrainian forces maintain control over Mahorad and ensure supply of the garrison stationed there. However, today a video was published that is clearly current, possibly recorded just a few hours ago, since snow cover is visible in the frames. Currently, snow has fallen in the Donetsk region, which serves as an indicator of the material's freshness. The presented frames show a column of Russian armored vehicles moving toward the front line. This episode was geolocated. Precisely at the indicated point, Russian equipment after crossing the railway line continued movement to the north and northwest, presumably in the direction of Huliaipole. Strikes were carried out against the equipment. These frames are of paramount importance, and to my knowledge, this is the first video confirmation of the presence of Russian heavy armored vehicles in the northern districts of Pokrovsk. Until the present moment, there were only video materials featuring infantry subdivisions and diversionary reconnaissance groups. The appearance of equipment in the northern part of Pokrovsk is being recorded for the first time. I remind you, this equipment was moving in the direction of Huliaipole. There are also frames from another object, a small industrial complex. They show Russian assault groups clearing this area. At the same time, these frames lack snow. Presumably, these recordings are somewhat less current. However, they also confirm the presence of confident control by Russian subdivisions over this district of the city. Next, let us move to Mahorad, from where important frames from central districts are also arriving. Video materials presented by the Ukrainian side also contain images of snow cover, which indicates that filming was conducted within the last 48 hours. The frames recorded a drone strike against a Russian serviceman who was moving along Chechirina Street at a specific point. Based on these materials, as well as corrections from various cartographic platforms, including pro-Ukrainian and neutral ones, changes were made to the maps. If yesterday, on the 10th of December 2025, the map had a certain appearance, then today practically the entire southern part of the Mahorad salient was subjected to correction. Under AFU control remains literally 20% of the original territory of Mahorad with adjacent areas, counting from the moment combat operations began on this section. Based on the current configuration, it can be assumed that within the next 5 to 10 days, the Russian army will completely clear this settlement, which will be announced, including by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Moving on to the Constantinovka direction, Russian units are also actively advancing forward on this section, clearing the southern and southeastern districts of the city. The intensity of battles is very high on this direction. Russian subdivisions are advancing not only directly on the territory of Constantinovka, but are also attacking along the Chasiv Yar-Kramatorsk railway branch. I remind you, active battles are currently ongoing for Verolyubivka and Popasno. The Russian army is executing a flanking maneuver into the rear of the Ukrainian grouping holding Constantinovka. In the near future, very dynamic development of events is expected on this section. Next, let us move to the Siversk direction. It is from here that the most significant and important news of today arrives. Just yesterday evening, pro-Russian sources distributed a video recording on which 2 Russian servicemen and 2 civilians are present, speaking about the clearing of Siversk. Yesterday, cartographic corrections were not made based on these frames. However, this already served as the first signal that in the near future, Siversk will be completely cleared, and information about this will come from official authorities. Yesterday, the cartographic situation on this section looked a certain way. Yesterday, neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographic platforms confirmed the advancement of the Russian army in Siversk and approach to the western boundaries of the city. Today, however, the map underwent significant changes. First and foremost, corrections were made based on data from various pro-Russian analysts who already in the morning declared Russian army control over 90% of Siversk. Data from neutral cartographic services, which also report control over 90% of the settlement, were also taken into account. However, already closer to the evening of the 11th of December 2025, Russian sources published a lengthy video with a duration of 11 minutes 30 seconds, dedicated to combat operations for Siversk. The presented frames demonstrate combat operations not only for Siversk itself, but also overall the course of operations for Bilohorivka, Serebryanka, Hryhorivka, Ivano-Darivka, Vyimka, for all settlements located on this section of the front. The video material is lengthy, and in the closing seconds approximately 10 and possibly more episodes of Russian flags being raised in various districts of the settlement are presented. Actually, a great many flags were installed, however, unfortunately, not all could be geolocated. This is truly a significant moment. Part of the flags were successfully identified by location. One of the flags, for example, was installed in the very northern part of the city in the area of Donetska Street, at a specific point. Another flag was installed at the Stele, where a T-34 tank from World War II is located. One of the flags was raised in the southern part at the railway station. And another flag was installed on the very southern outskirts. I repeat, more flags were installed, but only these have been geolocated so far. Perhaps in the near future additional information will appear, and then a complete correction of Siversk will be made. But for now the map remains in the presented form. As can be seen, all the flags that were successfully geolocated are positioned as if around the perimeter of the western central part of the city. Thereby, it is as if being communicated that in this part of Siversk it is still unsafe to install flags, and possibly clearing is still continuing here. This refers to the western bank of the Bakhmutka River. Another important moment. At the time of preparation of this video material, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has not yet officially confirmed control over Siversk. Perhaps this will happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But in any case, it is obvious that within the next 72 hours, Siversk will be completely designated as Russian territory, and the Russian army will continue the offensive in the direction of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Actually, with the fall of Siversk, the battle for the last major cities of Donbas begins. Also, the Russian army is actively advancing from the direction of Soledar along Highway M03. Today, individual cartographers report advancement in the area of Vasukivka and Pazino. This information is confirmed both by pro-Russian analysts and neutral cartographic platforms. In this case, the Russian army is actively advancing in the direction of the most powerful fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine. This fortified area is located in the area of several settlements: Ry-Oleksandrivka, Kaliniki, Reznikivka, further in the direction of Sviato-Pokrovsk, further north to Zakotnoye, Ozanoye, and of course the settlement of Kriva Luka. This is a single large fortified area, riddled with trenches, equipped with numerous bunkers, anti-tank barriers, barbed wire. All of this is located precisely here. And Russian subdivisions, as can be seen, are currently approaching this fortified area from three directions: from the south, east, and north. In case the Ukrainian army loses control over this fortified area, the battle for Sloviansk and Kramatorsk will automatically begin. First, the Russian army will need to approach the Sloviansk power station, after combat operations, for which, in all probability, electrical supply to both Kramatorsk and Sloviansk will cease, and evacuation of the civilian population will begin. Somewhat to the north, the Russian army continues combat operations in the Lyman forest massif. This is the territory between Lyman and Yampil. Here, a correction is being recorded based on the presented video material. Ukrainian sources publish a video on which they observe the movement of Russian saboteurs occupying a building in the area of Dibrova, and Ukrainians begin striking this object with the use of drones. If yesterday the map had a certain appearance, and most of these territories were considered a grey zone, then today sufficient evidence is already appearing of the presence of confident control by the Russian army over this area. Somewhat to the northwest, the main combat operations are unfolding along the Sviatohirsk-Yarovaya line. Here also, video materials and corrections from various cartographers have been published, according to which the Russian army managed to bypass the main defensive line of the armed forces of Ukraine and enter the territory of Yarovaya. On similar frames, 3 Russian saboteurs can be observed entering the territory of Yarovaya, taking positions, and strikes with the use of drones from the armed forces of Ukraine immediately begin against the object. Based on these materials, as well as data from various cartographic platforms, corrections were made. Thus, the continued improvement by the Russian army of its positions along the flanks around Lyman is being observed, complicating logistics for AFU subdivisions, and in all probability, in the near future, the intensity of combat operations for Lyman itself will be extremely high. On the Kupiansk section, no changes have been recorded. In the northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast, there are corrections. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reports that the North Group of forces managed to completely clear the settlement of Lyman, located somewhat west of Vilcha. Cartographic corrections over the last 2 days show the gradual emergence of the Russian army into the Kharkiv operational expanse. After the clearing of Vilcha, an offensive in the direction of Bely Kolodez will begin. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian side continues to insist on the establishment or commencement of some kind of energy truce, which is extremely important for Ukraine. That is all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best.